Good morning. It's great to see a great turnout today. We've been blessed with sort of like a great weather here. We've had some January events in the past which have been a little dicey, so it's great that everybody got here, and it looks like quite early. I think last year we might have had an ice storm around this time or something like that, and it was a late arriving crowd. So my name is Jeff Sharp, and I'm the director of the School of Environment and Natural Resources, and we host this event. We're delighted to have everybody here. We are excited to kickstart the new year with an informative and hopefully entertaining topic, the Bourbon Barrel Connection. Before we dive into today's topic, a quick look back at our autumn semester. Last semester, we hosted over 650 different individuals at one or more of our EPN Breakfast. Of those attendees, approximately 200 were students and 450 were non-student professionals, dedicated volunteers, and members of the community. Our EPN team ran the numbers and counted about 750 breakfasts, and countless gallons of hemisphere coffee were served between August and December. We really appreciate the participation of all of you in these events. For those of you that are new to the EPN, we're delighted to have you here, and we encourage you to consider attending future events. If you're at a table with students, please take advantage of the opportunity to network them. One of our goals in bringing all these professionals and students together is to provide professional education and awareness about the opportunities out there, and we're aware that there are a lot of opportunities out there, so the students appreciate the opportunity to hear from you all. We are glad to be here today to welcome a new year and a new series of topics. I have tried to look out to see if anyone was so passionate enough about maple syrup for breakfast they purchased a bottle and are using it at their table. I don't quite see that here. But I'm excited about we're excited to be selling officially branded Ohio State University maple syrup. Now, some of you are aware of how serious Ohio State is about brand standards, so Kathy Smith and Gabe Carnes spent months working with the university to be able to officially label that Ohio State University maple syrup, but we're delighted now that we have it available for you all. At each of your tables, you'll find a document listing sizes and pricing for the maple syrup. We'll probably bring this back to future EPNs. We'd be delighted to sell some to you. This actually is maple syrup that originated from one of our capstone projects based on the Mansfield campus. So some of you that were at the December EPN observed some of the capstone projects. This was actually a capstone project from about 4 or 5 years ago where they documented the sugar bush there, and one thing led to another, and we were able to sort of like create this wonderful resource for us. Funds generated from the syrup sale go back into the operation of the sugar bush. It will support several student scholarships and internships. It'll support woodland management research and support maple-based outreach for natural resource professionals, landowners, and students. We have a lot of maple syrup. Obviously, we had last year's production. It took us a long time to sell it, so we've got, 750 gallons, Gabe, is that right? Okay. Okay, so we're going to have a lot of maple syrup. So we're delighted to sort of share it with you. It can make a great gift or something like that if you have any events where you want to pass something out. And I'm sure based on the pricing, there will be bulk pricing on some of this stuff too. So thank you to Professor Gabe Carnes, who just spoke up there, and the Forestry Forum students who helped organize and staff this year's sale. I do want to officially welcome all the students in the room back to the first semester of 2020. If you're a current student, please raise your hand. Well, great turnout. Thank you for joining us. So take a look around if you're a professional, and take a chance. And at the end of the event, if you have a chance, visit with these students. We're very proud of them. They come from all across the university. Some of them are in forestry, engineering, business, etc. So a lot of talent here today. Thank you for being here today, students. And if you are a professional in the audience, take a chance to introduce yourself. All students sign up at no cost for our EPN Breakfast each month, thanks to sponsorship from a variety of sponsors, including our school and the Sustainability Institute of Ohio State, as well as individuals who chose to sponsor a student through the registration process. You can identify those people that sponsored students in the back of your program. Take a look at that, and if you're in attendance in the future, please consider supporting our students by helping pay for their breakfast. For today's program, additional student sponsorship support was provided by our co-host, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry. Please take a look at the outline of today's program in the EPN brochure at your table. There you'll find an agenda featuring who will be speaking, on what topics, and what order. You will also find professional bios for the speakers. I encourage you to write down your questions during the course of our presentations, as there will be time at the conclusion of our last presentation for some Q&A, including a moderated component and then an open audience Q&A. To introduce today's program is Mr. Dan Balser, Chief of ODNR's Division of Forestry and the State Forester of Ohio. As Director of Ohio State School of Environment and Natural Resources, I'm proud to say that Dan is a two-time alumni of our school, having earned both a bachelor's and master's degree from the school. Prior to his promotion to chief a year ago, Dan served for 9 years as assistant chief of the division, managing fiscal operations, human resources, the urban service and forest health programs, as well as communications. He had a large portfolio, but he has a larger one now, I suspect. So he has also served as the division as the forest health program administrator as an urban forester. I'm so delighted to thank him for his agency sponsorship today. And now I'd like to bring him to the stage, Chief Dan Balser.
Thank you, Dr. Sharp. Good morning. It's really my pleasure to sort of introduce this topic of oak in Ohio and the importance of oak in Ohio. I'm going to provide just some very brief introductory remarks along those lines. So oak has a very special place in Ohio's ecological and economic world, particularly in southern Ohio. And we're doing a lot of important work down there right now. So you're going to hear from a panel of folks today who are part of an interagency forestry team and a connection with the Speyside Bourbon Barrel production facility. Now, these are unique components that are linked because of a resource that we're trying to promote through Ohio forestry programs, and a component, raw material that is needed for that production there in Jackson, Ohio. So this is a very unique thing. We're thrilled to be a part of it. You're going to hear from Darren Whitmer, Cotton Randall, Dave Apsley, and then Jamie Dahl is going to wrap it up with some Q&A. So you're going to get a very good broad brush view of sort of what's happening with this oak project in southern Ohio. So sort of why care about oaks? I mentioned that they were an important component. Why are they important? For one thing, they're long-lived. They live for hundreds of years, and they help to stabilize the forest community because they're long-term components. Warning to future speakers, this thing is like really sensitive. Oaks provide critical and diverse habitat for a wide variety of wildlife species, so that's also a very important component of what we do when we're managing oak forests. Appalachian oaks also contribute greatly to Ohio's forest industry. Ohio's forest industry is $27 billion annually in the state, so that's a significant economic impact in our state, and we have to recognize that. And then 67% of all trees harvested in Ohio are oaks. Part of that is based on their availability and on their being an important component of a lot of the forests in southern Ohio, and also a component of their economic importance. So the Ohio Interagency Forestry Team has been going on for a couple of years now, and it's a broad membership of organizations who are interested in forest management in the state. And we've come together around this issue of oak management, particularly in southern Ohio. It's really quite remarkable to have a group and several groups like this come together and really work on an issue together in a long-term sustainable way. So you look at the list of folks who are involved with this project, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. That's an agency as part of the USDA. And then all three branches of the U.S. Forest Service are part of the project and part of the program. And that in and of itself is sometimes astounding that all three of those components of the U.S. Forest Service come together for a unique common interest. So those include state and private forestry, the Northern Research Station, and the Wayne National Forest. And of course, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, both the Division of Forestry and the Division of Wildlife, are very important partners in this project. and of course the cooperative extension services both from the Ohio State University and from Central State University. So I tried to take a quick look around this morning as we were mingling. I think there's a few people in the room who represent some of these agencies. I believe Dr. Sid Dasgupta from Central State, Director of Extension. If you would just stand and wave to folks. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Dasgupta. Dr. Jackie Wilkins from Ohio State Extension, Director of Ohio State Extension. Thank you for being here, Dr. Wilkins. And then Lewis Iverson from the USDA Forest Service Research. Thank you for being here representing the Forest Service today. So we kicked this off in September by signing a business plan. So we had worked for about a year and a half putting the business plan together to kind of guide and direct how this interagency forestry team would work together, what the issues would be, how we would communicate, all sorts of things. And we signed that business plan at the Farm Science Review this past September. So pictured here from left to right, Joe Koloski from the USDA Forest Service State and Private Forestry. Dr. Jeff Sharp, who you heard from just a few moments ago, representing Ohio State University at the signing. Alton Johnston from Central State University. Kerry Gilbert from the Wayne National Forest. I don't know who that guy is, but he looks drunk. And then Kendra Wecker, the chief of our Ohio Division of Wildlife. And Terry Cosby, the state conservationist for the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. So we had a signing that day, committing to work together to help resolve problems and issues and seize opportunities related to oak management in Southern Ohio. So without any further ado, I'm going to welcome Darren Whitmer to the stage. He's going to talk a little bit about Speyside Cooperage.
So I had 4 minutes of my time stolen. So I'm officially taking it from David Apsley. That was a great picture. David took that picture in our plant. Sorry, I went backwards in your slides, but so that's what we do. Just an hour and 15 minutes south of here, but we'll talk about that. So I'm Darren Whitmer, General Manager of Speyside Bourbon Cooperage. Asked to come and talk to you guys about the cooperage industry. So the topic I think is very fitting for the day since that's what we do. We make barrels right here in your backyard. Yeah, I've got a bio in there, but just real quick, I live in Louisville, Kentucky, born and raised there, went to the University of Louisville, did an MBA at Tennessee Martin on one of my jobs down there. Manufacturing, lifelong, love manufacturing, believe that it's what made America kind of what it is today. We have to have a manufacturing base to create jobs, to create wealth. So building stuff has always been my passion. So I've built Ford trucks, I've built Toyota forklift parts and bourbon barrels, and that's been the most fun easily. United States Navy veteran, and my spare time I like to fly planes and ride motorcycles too. So what is it we're talking about? White oak, right? So you see the acorn leaves and the acorns. Anybody know how to tell the difference between a red oak and a white oak by looking at the leaf, besides David? Yeah? So the red oak is going to have a pointy leaf, and the white oak is going to have a round leaf, right? So someone taught me that a long time ago, and they said if you think about an arrowhead being for the red oak, and then the white oak being a blunt point for like a bullet tip. So let me help you one day out in the woods. So we buy logs, we process them into staves, S-T-A-V-E-S, staves, the sides of the barrels, and then the heading pieces, which are the tops and the bottoms. We don't call it a top or a bottom, we call it a head or heading pieces. And then the final product is a barrel. So David's probably going to talk about this, but I may steal a little bit of your thunder. So 15.7% of all white oak, or all hardwood is white oak in the U.S. The green areas are the predominant areas for white oak. We happen to buy basically The darker green states, that's where we get a lot of our material. And then you can see the total annual harvest. Do you agree with those slides, David? They're pretty accurate. Yeah. Why do we use white oak as Cooper? So someone figured out a long time ago that if you're going to make a container to haul stuff in, especially if it's going to have liquid, you don't want the wood to leak, right? So if you tried to make a barrel out of maple, and I have, and you try to make a barrel out of red oak, and I have, or out of walnut, and I have, they all leak. It's very porous material. So we really can trace coopering back to probably Egypt. And they were making, obviously they didn't have plastic and glass and stainless steel, right? So you had to make a container to haul something, whether it was a grain or a fish or whatever it was. So over time, to hold liquid, we figured out that white oak is very dense. It has little cells called tyloses in them, and it really acts as a membrane to keep liquid in. At the same time, the oak it can still breathe. So when you put liquid, whether it's oil or bourbon, in my case, put bourbon in it, it doesn't leak. And when you sell barrels to distilleries and they put hundreds of gallons in barrels every day, they don't want it to leak, obviously. There's a lot of money there. Other interesting thing is that the white oak is full of flavors and colors, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. When we make white oak staves, the slats that I talked about, we saw it differently than we would table. Usually there's an exposed piece of wood, but like on the door, you can see the grain. So when we saw wood for stave making, we quarter saw it. So we take the log, we cut it into 4 quarters, literally, then we slice it back and forth like you would on a meat slicer. So we orient the rays the correct way, and I can get into some real nerdy stuff, but I won't. But you can look up quarter sawing versus flat sawing and rift sawing to see why Coopers actually do it that way. So whiskey and bourbon, right? You guys hear those words thrown around. Are they the same? Is whiskey different than bourbon? I know somebody drank bourbon last night while they watched the football game. Did it say bourbon on your bottle, or did it say whiskey? Did it say bourbon whiskey? Nobody's going to cop to this, all right? Okay. So what we like to say is all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. So to be bourbon, it must be, actually, I've got a list up here on the screen already, 51% corn, has to be aged, and this is a magic part that underlined down at the bottom, has to be aged in a new charred white oak barrel, or it cannot be bourbon. So we sell used barrels, and I'll talk more about our company in a second. We sell used barrels. The used barrels go to Scotland, Canada, Mexico for tequila, and people age different products in them. Maple syrup, right? Where's my maple syrup guy? Elliot, somewhere? There he is. So one time, and one time only, can you use a brand new barrel to age bourbon in. Then after that, it lives for a long time. That's an interesting thing. A white oak tree probably takes 30, 40, 50 years to get to the size that we need to make it a stave log. But bourbon barrels can easily have a life of 30, 35, 40 years sometimes. If you think about it, if you have any Scotch drinkers in here, when you buy a Scotch, a good one's 10 years old, right? At least, if not 12, sometimes 20. So we've already used the barrel for bourbon for 4, 5, 6 years. We sell it to Scotland. They use it a couple times for long cycles, 10 and 12 years each time. That barrel could easily get up to being 35, 40 years old. So interesting tidbit about that. And then after that, they still have another life. They usually turn into a planter barrel or something like that. So it's an industry. We know the value of the material. We, at our plant in Jackson, Ohio, there's nothing that goes to waste. We have sawdust. We put it in our boiler and make fuel out of it. We make paper chips for the paper mills and Chillicothe, things like that. Even what we sweep off the floor goes back into a grinder. So we really know the value of it. We have to take care of it. We want it to last as long as we can, which is why we have a great partnership with these guys, part of our supply chain. So a little bit about Speyside. If you go back to about 1947, my boss still, who's semi-retired in Scotland, William Taylor, his family, his grandfather started Speyside Cooperage. In Scotland, coopering is more of a used barrel art or trade. It's not a new barrel like what we do over here. So over in Scotland, where Scotch is made, obviously, they take hundreds of thousands of used barrels every year. to their cooperages. If they have a broken piece of wood or need something repaired, they repair them and then resell them to the Scotch industry for use in making Scotch. 2008, a company called TFF acquired Speyside, French company, and put the used barrel business underneath their umbrella. TFF is very interesting. Tonnellaire Francois Frere, which is, Tonnellaire is a French word for cooper. Francois is a family name, and Frere means brother in French. We probably have some French majors in here possibly. So it's the Francois Brothers Cooperage. The company goes back to 1910, so we're over a 100-year company. So it's the international piece is really fascinating for the industry. So you've got a French parent company that bought a Scottish cooperage. The French side does wine barrels. The Scottish side does used barrels. I worked at Brown-Forman, which is Jack Daniel's, largely Woodford Reserve, for about 13 years. They hired me to come on board and build the new barrel division. So now we've got like a Scottish component, a French component, and an American component, which is really fun for me because I get to go to Scotland and France too. But so we're the largest cooperage company in the world with all three of our divisions together. So largest used barrel company, largest wine barrel company, and the second largest new barrel company. And we just really started making barrels 5 years ago in Jackson, Ohio, in that plant down there. And I'll touch on that more in a second. So in Scotland, we have a couple plants, one outside of Louisville and Shepherdsville, and then, of course, the new barrel side of the company, which is comprised of Jackson, Ohio, 2 mills in Waverly, a mill in Kentucky, a mill in Millboro, Virginia, a mill in Glade Spring, Virginia, and then our newest cooperage, which we're literally working on starting right now. It's what I've been doing for the last month. Is opening in Atkins, Virginia, which is another Miralat factory. So if you've ever driven down 23 by Jackson, you see the white and the blue building on the side of the road. That was the Miralat cabinet factory since the 70s. The building that we got in Atkins was also a Miralat factory. Same paint colors and everything. So it really works out well for us. Wood-fired boilers, pre-dryers, kilns, all that kind of stuff is already there. The infrastructure's there. It allows us to jump in and build a plant and start it in about 18 months. So we're literally getting our second plant underway now. We've already shipped like 1 or 2 loads of barrels. So it's a pretty exciting time for us. We have a group of log buyers, 9 log buyers that travel the country in those green, dark green shaded states that I showed you earlier to purchase logs. And we're out there competing with the rest of the hardwood market. We only want one species of white oak, the Quercus alba. We only want one section of it. We call it the butt cut. It's from the ground about 8 to 10 feet up. It's not a veneer grade. It's not a low-end grade. It's somewhere right in the middle, so we're very selective. So we kind of have to go with what the market does. We always buy a little bit above market price so we can get what we want. If the industry, if the lumber market is having tough times, we have tough times. If it's going well, we do well. So we're really dependent on what happens in the log market. I got 2 minutes. I'm gonna need a couple more than that. So real quick, our stave mills, I talked about where they were. A couple pictures. Those are the 2 mills in Waverly. So you guys know where Waverly, Ohio is. This is a brand new facility we built and started last year in Millboro, Virginia. First greenfield site that we'd ever built. There are 40 employees there. This is the site that we're building in Glade Spring. It's about 3-4 weeks from opening. It's 20 miles south of the Atkins Cooperage, so that'll be open real soon. We bought this stave mill in Manchester, Kentucky last August. So that makes our 5th, counting the one that we're building. Then there's Jackson, Ohio. So that's the one if you drive down the road. I think David's going to invite you guys to come see it as well. But you can drive right past it, take a look at it. It's really neat because it's been there since the 70s. The maintenance manager, office manager, several operators, old employees of Miralat, we've gotten back, and they've been invaluable because they know the facility so well. So we've really been able to kind of grow with the community there. There was 175 people there. That's the Atkins facility. Like I told you, it's the same paint scheme. So now if you were to go there today, there's cars everywhere, wood on the yard, things like that. It'll also have probably 175 employees one day as well, plus our mills. We're well over 400 employees now in 5 years' time. So what I've been doing for the last 5 years, literally. It started with me 5 years ago. Now we're at 7 sites and 400 employees, and we'll make 500,000 barrels this year. So I got through it pretty quick. Are we going to do questions now or later? Is that at the end? Okay, so I tried to hurry it along a little bit, but I can sit up here and talk about the subject all day, and we can do it afterwards as well. So, thank you.
Hello. I'm Dave Apsley. Cotton Randall and I are going to be co-presenting this, but I'm going to kick it off here. And then Jamie Dahl helped me put some of this presentation together as well. So I'd like to start out with some Ohio forestry stats, just to give you some perspective. We've got 8 million acres of forest in Ohio, which is about a third of the land area. It's more land area than corn and soybeans. I always like to say that among our ag audiences. It's 85% privately owned and 70% owned by individuals or families. 66% of it is in our Appalachian counties in the south and the eastern part of the state. And it's a $27 billion industry. So just in perspective, that's probably about 20% of the ag industry in Ohio. I wish we had that kind of investment, right, Jeff? So I'd like to start out with this. I actually used this with Darren at the ACIA, the Cooperage convention, just to talk about all the obstacles that prevent an acorn from becoming a barrel. So if you think about it, there's lots of things that can happen. Insects, animals eating them, seedlings get a tough start and a lot of them don't make it. You got competition going on. You don't have the quality to meet the standards that they need in the industry. They might get harvested too early to even be large enough for a bourbon barrel, or they may never get harvested. A lot of our private landowners never do a harvest. Tree mortality, which we've had a lot of white oak mortality in the last 10 or 15 years in Ohio. So how many acorns does it take to make a bourbon barrel? We're going to revisit that towards the end, so just think about that a little bit. So here's kind of the issue. Our forests in Ohio are dominated by oak, and this is just showing the relationship between oaks and maples. So 50% of the canopy is all the other species. We're blessed with a variety of species in Ohio. But when you compare our oaks and predominantly to our red maples, this is what the canopy looks like. Heavy to oak. It's about 70% oak. Trees greater than 15 inches in Ohio, 70% are oak. Actually, I should give you a little background. This data is actually from our southeastern counties, our 17 counties that Cotton and I are going to talk more about later. Start looking at the smaller trees, 5 to 15 inches. You guys see the shift? And then we go down to the 1-inch to 5-inch trees. Look at that shift. Only about 20% of those trees are oak. So if you kind of see what the future's bringing, we're shifting our forest from oak to maple. And we'll talk a bit about why that's happening. Disturbances, oaks love disturbance. Fire was a big part of why oak got established in Ohio, and it's much less frequent. Smokey Bear's done a great job since the 20s. We don't have livestock grazing, which I think gave oaks an advantage as well. Not near as much, and fortunately we don't have it in the woods because they can do a lot of other damage as well. And then our timber harvesting practice have shifted where we're just taking individual trees out of the canopy and we're not getting enough light to the forest floor. We did a focus group session in Logan about a year ago, and one of the landowners said, well, you're trying to manage for something that has a bounty on it. How's that going to work? By bounty, he's saying the prices are high. Obviously, we're going to target those species. So what we tend to do is harvest large oaks out of the canopy, but we're not taking the other species out proportionally. We're not taking the maples out, especially the red maples. And because of that, we're not getting enough light to the forest floor. As we mentioned, fire was a big part of why we have oak. Mature oaks have thick bark. They're well adapted to wall-off damage. A lot of the characteristics Darren talked about that make oak good for barrels make them also very rot resistant. And they can just isolate damage and not decay rapidly. But one of their major adaptations, in this picture we've kind of highlighted that root on that white oak seedling, is they have big root systems when they're seedlings. If they're grown under the right conditions, they develop this huge root. And then when disturbance happens, a fire top kills it, or a cow browses it, or a deer browses it, then they have the ability to resprout and grow rapidly. So that's kind of their ecological strategy. And they're designed to burn. If you've been in an oak forest, you walk through the woods, you hear and feel those leaves crunching under your feet. So in a nutshell, I actually gave a presentation in Kentucky, and there was a Franciscan monk sitting in the back row, and I'm a cradle Catholic, and I put that slide up. Cut and pray rarely works, and I kind of got the look, but in reality, just cutting, not thinking about it, you're not going to get oak regeneration. It's a process. It takes management. We need to think about those acorn crops. We've mentioned why acorns are so important, but acorn crops are very cyclic. We get big boom and bust years with acorns, and then those boom years, there are acorns that can produce seedlings that can make it through. Most of the other years, the seedlings get consumed, or the seedlings don't even exist because the acorns get consumed. And what we need to do is try to improve the competitiveness of these seedlings. To do that, we've got to get light to the forest floor. We've got to work on that mid-story, which is an investment. And a lot of times, after the mid-story is removed, we've got to remove some of that overstory to get partial light to the forest floor. And that helps to make those seedlings competitive. So if you look at that top row of pictures, that's kind of what we've got. I know those pictures are small, but we've got a lot of shade-loving or shade-tolerant species in that mid-story. A lot of that's red maple in our part of the world. When you look up from the forest floor, you're not seeing much light getting through. And look at the picture on the right, there's not much on the forest floor. If there is stuff down there, it's shade-tolerant things like maple and beech. The bottom row is what we hope to see, and that's what we're going to need to do to get more oak regeneration. If you look at the picture over here, that's all a sea of oak regeneration about this tall, and that's in a site that has been burned multiple times. So with that, I believe the next slide is Cotton. He's going to talk about our combined efforts, and then I'm going to wrap back up talking about our outreach efforts.
All right. Darren and Dave got to talk about the fun stuff, and I got to talk about monthly meetings for the past 5 years. But you saw this picture already. This is the leadership team from the Ohio Interagency Forestry Team. That's the head of each agency. And I'm going to just dig into a little bit deeper about how that team came about and how it's structured. So start off with, this is a map of the priority area that we're focusing in with the Ohio Interagency Forestry Team. It's 17 counties in southeast Ohio. Both Dave and Dan kind of drew the picture of why this is important. You can see on this map, all those colored areas are public ownership. So we've got Wayne National Forest is in those 17 counties. The majority of our state forests are in those counties, as well as some large wildlife areas with Division of Wildlife and other ownership, and a lot of private land, and that's also the most heavily forested area of the state. So talk a little bit about kind of the origin and the history of the team. Back in the early 2000s, the Ohio Division of Forestry started partnering with NRCS to do private landowner assistance, to get financial assistance programs from the USDA out to Ohio woodland owners. And we were actually one of the first states to have an agreement between NRCS and the state forestry agency. And we've been real successful and continue to be successful with that. So in 2007, there was the first, at the national level, the first joint forestry team. And accordingly, just a year later here in Ohio, we had our first joint forestry team in 2008. And I think we might have been the first state to form one at the state level. And that was composed of Ohio Division of Forestry, NRCS, and Wayne National Forest. So we kind of already had the NRCS and Division of Forestry working together, and Wayne National Forest joined that group. And we did a lot of good things, had some good projects, some special EQIP practices, which is a program for getting cost sharing to landowners for woodland improvement work. And we worked along for a while, and then about 5 years ago, we got together and developed a proposal for the Joint Chiefs Restoration Partnership Grants. And the Joint Chiefs, in this case, the two chiefs are the chief of the U.S. Forest Service and the chief of NRCS at the national level. And we were successful in getting a project, and it focused on collaborative oak management in those 17 counties that were shown previously, so Southeast Ohio. And that grant did two things. It allowed us to get some management done on the ground, both at state and federal lands through some grant funds, and private lands working with NRCS and their cost share programs for landowners and our service foresters at the Division of Forestry, getting that applied out on the ground, meeting with landowners. So that was kind of the on-the-ground work, but then a big part of that grant also helped us accelerate our development as a team. We expanded the membership in the forestry team and developed a new business model, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about, how that business model is structured. Okay, so then at the end of that 3-year grant is when we renamed the Joint Forestry Team as Ohio's Interagency Forestry Team, and ended up with the longer list of members that Dan mentioned in his presentation. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see we went from just one branch of the Forest Service, the Wayne National Forest, to all 3 branches, added Division of Wildlife, and added Cooperative Extension, who we've been working with a lot already, but weren't formally on the team. So this is kind of the new interagency model that we have developed. This tree kind of shows the structure of that model. There it is. All right, so you've got leadership at the top, that's the head of each agency, and then you have middle management. And the middle managers, I'm one of the middle managers for the Division of Forestry. Those are the kind of program managers in the different agencies. And then there's working groups, which include folks from these agencies, but also includes other partners to focus on specific topics like wildlife, GIS development, non-native invasives, et cetera. And this model is kind of laid out in several documents. So we had the old MOU from 2008 we had to update. All that really does, it doesn't commit money or anything, it just says that these different agencies are gonna partner together. And the focus of this, how we selected which agencies participated, this is an agency team, so it's government agencies or universities who have core programs that focus on forests and forest management. And so we had that, just a regular agreement, and then we also developed a charter document to go with that agreement that lays out a lot more details about how the team is gonna function. So that includes monthly meetings by the middle managers, at least twice a year meetings by the leadership. It kind of lays out all these different working groups, and it lays out kind of the foundation for the team and how we're gonna frame our work. And I'm gonna talk a little bit more detail about each of the 3 of these: the regional science framework, coordinated outreach and communication, and landscape scale strategies. And then one last thing that is critical is we had people from each agency kind of working on these teams, but we were able to create a liaison position, a joint position between Wayne National Forest and NRCS, who's kind of a team coordinator, and she's really critical for keeping us organized because we all have our regular jobs that we're working on as well. So I'm gonna just dig a little bit deeper into each one of those kind of 3 foundations for the team. So the regional science framework is focused on data, tools, and training. And I'm not going to go through all of these. Dave's going to touch on some of these in just a few minutes. But examples of data, when we got together to start planning management across ownership, across a landscape, immediately we ran into challenges with state inventories and data sets being different from federal inventory and data sets, using different language, even different names for the forest types. So the first thing we had to do is integrate our inventories. We had to get a common data dictionary for how we're referring to the resource, and put it in a web-based format, a map viewer, where we could whatever agency you're from, you could go on and you can view the management units across all ownership. And then one other kind of regional science framework thing I'll talk about is the Silva. If you're not familiar with Silva oak, it's a decision support tool for oak silviculture. We've been using it on state forest lands for a long time. Wayne National Forest also uses it some. But they had, like I said, kind of different structure to their plots and everything. So we kind of got all on the same page on that. We made sure that all members of the team, even if they're not foresters, went through an oak silva training. So we've got folks from NRCS who aren't foresters. wildlife biologists from Division of Wildlife going through this oak silva training. Whether they're actually going to use it for planning and prescriptions in forest or not didn't matter as much as that they're getting that. It's a really good course for understanding the silviculture of oak, so we're all on the same page. So second kind of foundational piece is coordinated communication and outreach, and that's both internally and externally. And we've been working hard on this. We have a small group of middle managers that meet regularly, but everybody who's doing all this work doesn't meet on a regular basis, so that internal communication is always a challenge. And then also when we're communicating externally, making sure that we're consistent in the messaging we're using. And then the last part is that landscape scale conservation and strategies. And that's kind of getting that landscape scale treatments across all ownerships on the ground, using agreed upon objectives, trying to identify all the different authorities and resources that each agency brings to the table and trying to leverage those. So that's kind of the new model. And as Dan mentioned, we, back in September at Farm Science Review, signed the first 5-year business plan. And so I'm just going to talk briefly about what's in that business plan, because it's kind of applying that model on the ground for the next 5 years. So we kind of, as most business plans, you kind of ask these key questions as we're developing it. Where are we? Where do we want to be? How do we get there? And then have some kind of monitoring and measurement to see if we made it. So it's kind of organized in 2 parts. There's the whole 17-county focus area in southeast Ohio, and the business plan lays out operating procedures, products we're going to produce, that communication, telling a consistent story about oak, and also some details about how are we going to continue to develop and utilize the regional science framework for everything that we do. And then the second part of the plan is on the ground management, the implementation side. And so we identified what we're calling a shared stewardship project, and it's within that larger 17 counties. We're zooming in this blue circle, and this is the Athens unit of the Wayne National Forest. There's several wildlife areas, O'Dowd, Zaleski, Vinton Furnace State Forest. So we have some large tracts of public ownership that are all closely located to each other, and then a lot of private land where we already have relationships through our Division of Forestry Service Forestry program and NRCS programs. And so we're going to have a focused effort there where we're getting management done across all boundaries. And so that involves if we're doing treatments on the Wayne National Forest or on state forest land, and there's an adjacent landowner there who might benefit from the same management, trying to figure out how can we do all that at the same time across all ownerships. So I just got a couple more slides to just give a little bit more background. So that Joint Chiefs project helped us really get organized, develop this new model, this new business plan, and we've also been able to get some increased capacity. So over the past few years, we've had over $700,000 of kind of additional investment, and this could be federal, state, and some of that's been in additional positions. We've created several forester positions, partnership positions between ODNR and USDA, some socioeconomics research. That was a key piece that was missing earlier on in our efforts, and some additional interns that we didn't have in the past. Jamie's the new forestry extension position, really excited to have her on board, and that added an additional dimension that we were missing. And on the research side, work at getting a new silvicultural position through the U.S. Forest Service research branch, obviously the 5-year business plan. But in that business plan, it also identifies additional resources needed to really be fully successful in what we're trying to do. And so we can always use more resources. So this is my last slide, just a little bit of kind of taking a step back and lessons learned. We've been pretty successful up till now. We still have a lot of work to do. That liaison position was one of the key things because it's just so hard to keep organized and keep things moving. And not only do we have the liaison position between NRCS and the Wayne National Forest, the Division of Forestry has a liaison position between us and NRCS. And having those 2 liaison positions that have dedicated time to keep us organized and on track it's really been critical. Also, meeting regularly. We have had monthly meetings for more than 5 years of the middle managers. And then, like I said, the leaderships gets together as well a couple times a year. And that's really key to keep us focused and moving forward and going towards our goals. Some of the challenges, field level engagement is always a challenge because there's a small group of us doing these monthly middle manager meetings, and the people who are actually getting the work done on the ground aren't in those meetings. So there's often a disconnect, and that's something we're consciously trying to address and make sure that everybody understands what we're doing, but it is a challenge that, you know, we haven't been completely successful in that yet. And then expanding partnerships. So pretty much everybody all the groups that I've talked about in my slides are government agencies, but there's a lot of other partners out there that are working on these issues, whatever angle they're coming from, a lot of non-government organizations and other partners. And so we're kind of at that point now. The working groups is one way where the partners come in and get involved, but there's a lot of other opportunities as well to expand these partnerships. So we kind of wanted to get our house in order internally first, and we feel like we're there now, and now we're really going to be pushing out to expand those partnerships.
Thanks, Cotton. I want to talk a little bit about outreach and engagement. We've relied a lot on this group called the Sustaining Family of Forest Initiative, which is based out of Yale. And it's an effort basically to learn about what makes private woodland owners tick. TELE stands for Tools for Engaging Landowners Effectively. If you're not familiar with that organization, check it out. They've been wonderful for us. They've actually done a workshop for us to help us learn how to market outreach and education to landowners. We're focusing on a particular subset of landowners, and I'll explain this as we go on. But they've also helped us with strategic planning. How do you get management on private lands on the scale we're talking about? And what they really recommended is focusing in on relationships we've already got, people that are already working with the Division of Forestry and their private service foresters, and then identifying those landowners that are doing things right, trying to take them to the next level, and then trying to bring in more landowners behind them. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're going to do some direct marketing directly to those landowners, the ones that have woodlands, that are doing management, but we're trying to get them to go the next step to do oak management and to really work on this problem. We've done focus groups as well to try to figure out what makes these folks tick so we can communicate with them. TELE has identified different segments of landowners. We chose to focus mostly on the Working the Land group. If you look at the numbers, the black represents state numbers, the red represents the numbers, the percentages of woodland owners in southeast Ohio that fall into those categories. So that's the biggest category, but it's also the category of folks most likely to do work on the ground. And then eventually we'll pull in the rest of the landowners as we can. Obviously the uninvolved, and some are going to be tougher than others. Out of this effort, we sat down and did some strategic planning, and we kind of settled in on this as kind of our message that we're trying to get out. We're trying to be consistent. We're going to see this a lot on a lot of things we do, that the future of oak is in our hands, and we've got to be proactive about it. So we're going to have consistent messages in our presentations, in our videos, whatever we do. And what we're trying to do, we realize people are at different stages on this ladder. Some just don't even know why oak's important. Others are managing their land, and we want to take them to another level. So we're trying to take folks, depending on where they are up this ladder, to eventually get them to the point where they're managing oak sustainably. Woodland owners are our primary audience, but we love to talk to the industry, foresters, natural resources folks. The forest industry, I've spoken at a couple of the conventions of the Association of Cooperage Industries of America. We're also looking to bring the general public along as well. And pretty much anybody that'll listen to our messages about oak. And we talked to a lot of these folks. I know the forestry students in the room have seen us down at the Vinton Furnace talking about the work that's going on down there as well. But we really want to make folks aware of this sustainability issue, and we want to bring them along. We also want to build some trust. Get to know folks, build the relationships, because that's how you really get things done. And part of that is that consistent messaging us all not, Division of Forestry and NRCS and Extension, all singing from the same hymnal, giving the same message, so we're not giving conflicting information. Jamie's heading up a program called Women Owning Woodlands, trying to bring an audience in that may not have historically participated as much. And then we're also working on publications as well. So we have this umbrella called Southeast Ohio Woods. Why Southeast Ohio? That 17-county area Cotton showed on the map is 43% of the forest in Ohio. So even though it's only about 20% of the land area, 43% of our forest is in this region. We've got lots of programs like A Day in the Woods, Call Before You Cut. We're going to talk about in a little more detail Women Owning Woodlands. Tree Talk, Jamie and I have been doing a lot of videos. We've also got social media. We're doing a lot of outreach in as many avenues as we can. We have a listserv where we've got 500 past participants to our woodland programs that we're emailing directly. Day in the Woods I'd like to talk about briefly. It's called our Second Friday series. It's focused in Appalachian Ohio. We wanted to get local woodland owners there. To do that in Appalachia, you have to make it attractive. You have to keep the cost within range. And what we're trying to do is offer as many topics as we can. Many of them have an oak topic or an oak focus, but just to get people with different interests in the door to see what oak management's all about and forest management's all about. Mostly it's in the field. I see Steve Matthews is here, Lewis is here, folks that have all helped us do these programs. We've had over 100 presenters from 20 different organizations helping with that program. And you can see by the little logo box, it needs updated. We need to add a few more logos, but we've got lots of partners, including the paper mill in Chillicothe, which is now Pixel. Just some images from our Day in the Woods programming. School of Environment and Natural Resources played a big role. You see the rattlesnake up there in the top. You don't get those pictures without a little help. Actually, that one I stumbled across with some Boy Scouts one day. But we do a lot of things, a lot of hands-on, get people in the woods, and then build the relationships. What's been interesting is when we do a Day in the Woods program, 20% of the people are natural resource professionals. So we're out there for the day. We've got woodland owners. We've got people just interested in woods, but they're interacting with their service forester, their local soil and water person, their local private lands biologist from Division of Wildlife. So we're building these relationships. We're gathering data. We've got evaluations on all of our programs. We're trying to see what makes it work. We're averaging about 40 people per event. For an all-day event, that's pretty good for a long period of time. The reason we get people out is because all of our partners participate. I often on evaluation get a comment saying, ask how did you learn about it? And they say my service forester, Mark Rickey, or Jason Van Houten, or somebody referred them and said, hey, this is a program you want to come and attend. So there's our numbers. Again, we've been at it for a little while. We've completed our 8th year. We've done 69 programs, and if you do the math pretty quickly, we're at about 40 people plus per event. So we're pretty excited. It's been a great run of things. Call Before You Cut. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Call Before You Cut, but it's a program that started in Athens, Ohio. Anybody heard anything about Athens lately? Anything happened out of Athens in the last day or two? But it was a brochure that started in the 90s. In 2006, we went statewide. Division of Forestry, Rural Action, and Extension partnered to take it statewide. In 2008, we got some additional funding and went to, I think, 6 states. And now, if you look at the map, I think it's 9 or 10 states actively involved. And Telly, that group out of Yale, really helped us to design this program to reach people. And we're currently developing oak-specific information. So folks who are going to Call Before You Cut that are thinking about a harvest are getting information so that they can do it in a sustainable way. And all Call Before You Cut is really, we're not trying to talk anybody into a harvest or out of a harvest. What we're trying to get them to do is to do their homework so they can work with a professional forestry and do it sustainably so that they can regenerate their forest and have a forest to pass on for the future. Just some other things we're doing. If you're not familiar, monthly, Jamie and I are doing a YouTube program. called Tree Talk. So if you're bored sometime, we're trying to get those videos down to shorter periods of time so they're a little more tolerable. But they're out there through the South Centers in Piketon. Jamie's leading this program called Women Owning Woodlands, again, just to build relationships, build trust, get more sustainable management on the ground eventually. And we've got publications to come. We're hoping to be a little further along, but we're hoping to be the first to actually jointly brand an OSU Central State University publication through Extension. This is a draft that you've got on the table. So if you folks have got comments on that draft, we would love your input. We've already sent it by some landowners. We know we need to make lots of changes and improve it, but that's a good starting point, we hope. And with that, I want to stay on schedule. How are we doing, Joe? I lost him. Are we okay on time? Anybody recognize the owl and the reference? Most of you might be too young, the students, but the Tootsie Pop, how many licks does it take? How many acorns do you think? One. The right one, right? You got to pick the right one and help it along and protect it and do all kinds of things. But how many acorns do you think it might take to make a bourbon barrel? Give me some numbers. 2,000. So about 1 in 10 acorns actually makes it to the point where it can get good contact. And these numbers are kind of wagging it a little bit. And Jay's looking at me. He's doing the Blue Jay work with acorns. So he's an acorn specialist. If you didn't realize, we have a person here looking at blue jays and how they are involved with acorns, their consumption, and they actually plant and move them around. So it's some neat stuff. Maybe 1 out of 10 of those acorns that gets good soil contact becomes a seedling. But here's where it gets tough. Most of those seedlings don't make it. Too shady, too much competition. Maybe once they get to a sapling, a tree that's got some decent size, they've got a pretty good chance of making it to the next size. And it takes about 4 of those to make a saw timber tree. One saw timber tree, Darren, I don't know, I guessed on these numbers, but about 2 barrels per saw timber tree. So if you do the math, we came up with 50,000 acorns per barrel. It might be 100,000, it might be 5,000, it really depends. But just as a conversation to start or to think about that process and how long it takes. Oh, and it takes a little time, too. Oaks don't grow very fast. And what a lot of people don't realize is they spend a lot of time in that seedling stage. And we increment core trees to get their age, but they might have a root system that's 30 years older than the increment core, what the increment core tells us. So it's a big investment of time and energy to get acorns to mature oak trees and bourbon barrels, which is great for our economy. I didn't mention, but the forest products industry is huge in Ohio, $27 billion. Most of the forest is in the Appalachian counties, but there are very few companies that actually add value. So what we're talking about there is we're not just shipping logs out necessarily or boards, we're actually making a finished product. Why is that important in Appalachian Ohio? It's jobs. It's really important when you think about our economy. If you haven't spent much time down there, and again, I hate to keep bringing up Joe Burrow, but he brought a lot of attention to Appalachia, and it's pretty important. So with that, Jamie's going to lead a question and answer session. Cotton, I think, is going to join me, and Darren's going to join me up here. And feel free to pick on Dan, too.
All right, thanks all. So I'm going to kick it off with some questions, but then we're looking forward to the audience asking some questions as well. So the first question that I wanted to start with is, what are some of the greatest challenges to implementing this work on the ground, and how does that look different on public land versus private land?
I can start. And then I'll pass that on to Cotton. This thing working? There it comes. So I think the biggest challenge is the investment of time and money. For private woodland owners, 70% is owned by family forest owners. And they look at their woods in a lot of different ways, but a lot of them don't invest the time and money that it takes to sustain the oak. If they harvest, they're not planning that far in advance. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. I'll let Cotton address the difference between state and private lands on that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's obviously easier for us on the land that we own, whether it's Division of Forestry or Wayne National Forest or Division of Wildlife. We kind of have a pretty good feel for what we need to do in terms of management practices to get the end product. Sometimes it's an issue of capacity, staff, and resources, but generally speaking, we can be pretty successful on our own lands. The challenge is on the private lands where, and if you want to have an influence on the resource across the landscape with 85% of Ohio's forests privately owned, you really need to do it on private land. And it's challenging because most landowners who own woods, they want to, if they are going to do a harvest, they want to do it in a way where they still have woods. But we talked about earlier, some of the challenges we have with regenerating oak have to do with getting enough light down to the ground. And so sometimes it's just a challenge to convince folks that this might be long-term the best practice, kind of what Dave talked about. Most private woodland owners aren't necessarily thinking about 50, 100 years down the road with their woods.
One more quick comment, too. With a third of the land area in forests, we don't have capacity that we need. And when you look at Division of Forestry, Extension, NRCS, all the partners, and you compare it to agriculture, we don't have a fraction of what they've got proportionally to the economy or the land area contribution. So that's a big piece, too.
Thanks. Darren, do you have anything you want to add on the industry role as it connects to some of those challenges?
So we're reaching out as an industry with our convention that they referenced a while ago with the White Oak Initiative. And so there is, and I don't know if you can talk more about it or not, but there is the White Oak Initiative that people in industry can associate with and learn how to influence the places that we buy white oak, the foresters that we buy it from, or the landowners that we buy it from, to get in programs like what you guys have here and what these guys have started. So from an industry standpoint, we're probably late to the game, to be honest. And actually, the entire cause is probably a little late to the game, if I were to be honest. So it's a big moving machine, and it's going to take time, I think, and probably a generation or two, frankly. But we have that kind of time. That's what we're doing, though.
Thanks. Do you want to add anything on the White Oak Initiative?
Just that, I mean, we are participating in the White Oak Initiative in Ohio through Division of Forestry and a larger interagency forestry team.
So, and the White Oak Initiative, if you didn't catch, is multi-state initiative. That's federal.
Yeah, so it's a very large effort, both Northeast and Midwestern states and Southern states. In the Northeast and Midwestern states, it's kind of being headed up by American Forest Foundation, Tree Farm organization, and then in partnership with the state forestry agencies, which, like I said, Ohio is one of the states signed on to that. And then in the South, the University of Kentucky is one of the leaders on that effort.
great. Thanks. So one more quick thing before we go to the audience. There's a publication that Dave mentioned that you all have. If you want to grab that and take a quick look, maybe Dave can give just a quick rundown on the kind of thought behind that publication and who it's targeting. And if anybody has any specific questions about that, we could do that.
So again, that's an early draft. It's taken longer. We've kind of been busy running in a lot of different directions. But the main thing we're thinking about using that for is to accompany in a letter to go to private woodland owners who are actively involved to encourage them to go to the next level. So that's where we're initially going to use that piece. And then we hope to modify it and have a series of extension fact sheets. That is kind of an overview, and then we'll get into the various parts of and some of the issues around oak. So we're going to have a series of hopefully 6 or so fact sheets. So any input that you folks have, we would love to have it.
Yeah, great.
Dave, you mentioned that harvesting is usually for oaks.
for the other trees that you might need to harvest, like poplar or other red maples? I mean, to manage for oak.
A lot of that does get harvested. It's just disproportional to oaks. A lot of the dominant trees in these forests are oak. And there are markets, but they change over time. Right now, with exporting, a lot of things have changed. We didn't mention, but white oak exports have really decreased because of the tariff talks and all that. So you get this change, and really what determines market for quality hardwoods is consumers. You know, what's hot in the market when it comes to furniture, flooring, and that. And then low grade depends on a lot of things like railroad tie demand, paper demand, the paper mill in Chillicothe, and so on and so forth. So there are markets, but when you look at what's being harvested, it's definitely more oak.
Just to add a little bit, so one of the challenges with working with the private woodland owner on a timber sale is there's a practice called high grading, where they're just taking out the trees of value and leaving the low quality trees or the genetically inferior trees or undesirable trees behind, and that kind of creates the environment like we talked about, where there's not only is there a shortage of light for oak seedlings, but there's also a shift, and you're kind of degrading the overall quality of the woods and the species composition. But that's one of the big things of Call Before You Cut, is trying to link a woodland owner with a professional forester, because if the professional forester marks it, they're gonna, you have to sell some stuff of quality to get somebody to bid on it, but you can also put in there some of that lower quality trees to get them out of there, and they'll buy them and remove them, and so you can have a more sustainable harvest that's gonna, instead of decline the quality of the woods, increase the quality of woods over time, and maybe address some of those oak management practices. So that's a big part of it. Is certainly if you have a marked sale by a forester, typically they're able to sell it. But the bigger challenge is having sales where a forester is not involved.
I have a question. Do you think that the lack of a state tree nursery and the lack of it for now over 10 years has something to do with the supply side? And would your life be easier growing more oak if a tree nursery were still in place?
We do miss our state nursery, tree nursery, but planting oaks and getting them into the canopy to mature tree is an even more difficult proposition. So really what we're promoting and encouraging is using natural regeneration and working with the seedling base that's out there. Mother Nature has the ability to do it with a little assistance. We just have to restore things so that we have the disturbance regime, we get rid of that mid-story, and we can regenerate oak. So we don't do a lot of planting of oak. A couple places you might do is if you're taking an old pasture or an old field, you want to get it to a forest quicker. Or in places like if you had a heavily dominated ash forest and you lost your overstory to emerald ash borer, we might do some supplemental planting. But normally we rely on and are pretty good at natural regeneration.
I'd like to thank everyone who spoke today for the work you're doing. It's very important in Ohio. And one thing I wanted to mention and ask about, I've looked at the FIA data. It looks like white oak is really in trouble in Ohio. There's an issue with sustainable harvest and whether or not it's actually being harvested sustainably right now. It looks like it's not, if you look at the FIA data. One of the concerns I would have is when you're doing an oak harvest, a lot of the literature talks about it's going to take 10 to 30 years of prescribed fire, multiple entries with thinning. It's just going to depend on what site you're on. But it sounds like if you're going to do a timber harvest, there's a lot involved, a lot of investment, which, you know, if it's going to be done, it should be done right. I'm just sort of curious, broad picture, I know there's a lot that folks are up against. What is it going to take to get a truly sustainable white oak industry with all these small private family forests that are out there?
I'll give that a shot and then I'll pass it on to Cotton and Darren. We actually had the state forester for Virginia speak at the Association of Cooperage Industries, and he mentioned that almost like a duck stamp for harvesting oak, where, you know, the industry, all the partners have to play together and work together, and we have to fight for resources for long-term management, and we have to do a lot of education. But you know, a lot of landowners think they're doing the right thing by doing a select cut.
You know, in fact, I get that call as an extension forester a lot, that I'm going to have a timber harvest and I'm only going to select cut. Well, is a select cut or selection harvest good? And my answer is it depends on who's doing the selecting. So that's part of it, but that investment of time to do the mid-story management, getting fire on private lands is a big obstacle. It's a tool that is not available right now easily, and we're making headway with that. There's actually prescribed fire is now an approved EQIP practice. Todd Hutchison with the Northern Research Station is looking at some mechanical and herbicide methods to replace fire. So it's a big educational effort. It's a big investment in time because landowners aren't thinking that far along, and a lot of times the land is turning over quicker than the time frame we're talking about. So I know that's not a great answer, but I'll turn it to Cotton and see if he's got anything to add.
Just real quick. So, I mean, it is a huge challenge, and I don't know if we have the solution statewide, but a couple things. So one of the big challenges is that we don't have enough foresters to service one-on-one every landowner that wants to do a harvest. So trying to increase capacity of resource professionals and even train across specialties, so not just foresters, but wildlife biologists, soil and water staff, everybody at least has that base knowledge. And then the second thing is that's one of the reasons why we're doing this shared stewardship project, is that even across the 17 counties, it's overwhelming to try to get proper oak management, sustainable harvesting done across all ownerships. And so we're zoomed in even closer to really it's maybe a 2-county area. It kind of touches 5 counties, I think, but it's kind of core in 2 counties. And in that area, take advantage of, we've got Wayne National Forest, we've got ODNR lands, some other local lands, and there's different authorities, like some of the U.S. Forest Service authorities allow the investment of federal funds on private lands if it's adjacent to or nearby public lands, and we have some additional resources in terms of forester staff hired to focus in those areas. So that's one of the thinking with the shared stewardship is, let's see how we can do in this really focused area across all lands, relying on all these different resources that we can invest there and see how that goes, and then maybe replicate that in different areas. But it is certainly a huge challenge statewide.
Cotton, before you pass it, I think just want to highlight one thing that Division of Forestry really pushing foresters on the ground and forest management plans for landowners, because if they have a plan, then they're less likely to do the wrong thing. But Cotton, could you share a little bit, aren't there some recent changes with some of the tax programs where they have to use a forester before harvesting?
Yeah, it's not really a change. There was a change in forest tax law in our language that says that a forester needs to be consulted prior to harvest, but you already had to follow a management plan written by a forester, so it kind of was already in there. It's just a little bit more explicit.
Okay, so.
I was just going to say it's education, and how do you entice a family landowner to want to regenerate white oak? It takes 40, 50, 60, 70 years for another harvest, right? So if I'm 51, if I own forest land and I cut it, I mean, I care what grows back, but do I really care what grows back? It's still going to grow back timber. So how do you encourage people to want to do that? And so what you guys just touched on could help that. And I know people don't like regulation, but at some point, we're probably going to have some regulation that says if you're going to cut your own timber, you're going to have to consult someone, which kind of seems foreign to the way we do it. But I know that we buy a lot of French oak. So we make wine barrels in France, and that's the way it is over there. There's still private land, but before you can cut your own land, you have to consult federal agencies over there before it's done. So we're probably going to have to get to that point, and it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight, and there'll be a lot of reluctance to it because we're Americans typically, really.
So I think at this point we have time for one more question from the audience.
So,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Sorry.
So I'm trying to get an idea of the scale here. So Cotton, you said you were focusing on that 2-county area in Wayne National Forest. So what % of the lands in those 2 counties is actually being managed for oak regeneration?
Well, I mean, I guess in general, the vast majority of forests in that land are oak-dominated forests. And I don't know what the percent forest cover in those counties is, probably in the 70, 80%, maybe 75% forest covered. I mean, there's going to be mixed in other forest types, but definitely the most common forest type is oak-dominated forest. So, well, I mean, it's the only thing that we can say for certainty that we can manage is the manage we own. You know, with the landowners, it's working in partnership, providing that education and outreach, and trying to encourage that management. So, I mean, it's tough to give a solid number on that, but you know, our hope is that maybe we can get over 50% of the land managed. Maybe that's something we could shoot for, but that's kind of throwing a dart out there right now.
All right, I think Jeff's going to close, and then we may have some additional questions. We encourage you all to come talk to the speakers after Jeff closes.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That closes today's program. I'm delighted to sort of like have so many people here attending. I think it's wonderful the work you all are doing and very informative presentation. One of the things I delight in is the sort of a host for this event is learning so much about so many different things. And this was a very informative program, and I hope that you all can go out there and become ambassadors for White Oak and sort of the management of Ohio's forest industry. I have to sort of like echo Dave's sort of comment. I do feel like sometimes whenever we have programs related to forestry, we have a great turnout here. It really is a challenge to go out there and raise awareness amongst the larger public, because I think this is a hidden resource in the state of Ohio that just does not get the attention it probably deserves. So you can all go out and become ambassadors, and we appreciate that effort. I do look forward, Joe, let's mark on the calendar, 5 years from now, we'll reconvene and sort of like get a progress report on the accomplishments of the initiative so far. But I also want to sort of like, we're excited to announce that we are going to officially invite you to participate in the June 9th EPN, where we're going to travel down to Vinton Furnace State Forest and the bourbon barrel making site. And this will be, some of you know, in the summer we do go on field trips, so we're going to actually travel down there, and we invite you to put that on your calendar now for June 9th. It'll be a day-long affair, but we will be very informative and actually get out in the forest and maybe have our own day in the woods. So it should be a great program, and we look forward to hosting you for that. The details of that are in your program. I do want to bring your attention to the coming events. Next month we have Jason Ward, a birder, writer, and the host of the web series Birds of North America. In case you're not familiar with his educational series or writing, I'm going to show a brief video now to introduce you to Jason.
Hello, everyone at the Ohio State University. My name is Jason Ward, and I hope to see you February 18th as I leave nice, warm Atlanta, and I come to what's hopefully not too cold in Ohio, and I come to speak to you about what else? Birds, but more specifically, birding. We're going to talk about my unorthodox path into ornithology. We're going to talk about my ongoing web series, Birds of North America. And we're also going to talk about the future of birding, and most importantly, the future of conservation and what it needs to look like in order for it to be at its best. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's time to go birding. There's a red-tailed hawk right there. Peace.
That should be a great program. We look forward to hosting you all for that, and hopefully you can join us. Details and registration for Jason's February 18th EPN Breakfast program are available at epn.osu.edu. Nicole Jackson can answer any questions pertaining to the week-long visit he's going to be giving to us and the suite of activities that will be here in Columbus. So if you have any birding friends, please let them know of this. It should be a great week. We're going to be including some collaborations and birding opportunities with the OSU Ornithology Club and the Grange Insurance Audubon Center. In March, we will continue our tradition of the water theme with some of the leading organizations in the state. Please note the dates on the back of your program, and feel free to take that program with you as a reminder of our future events, and help yourself to the other forestry-related educational items that are provided at your table. While you're making your way out the door and clearing off your table, please know that we are a zero waste event. We have signage over here to help guide you what bin you should put your item in, and help us continue our tradition of being zero waste. I do want to acknowledge our speakers. We do have certificates of appreciation that we'd like to give to each one of you, and I'd forgotten to note that earlier, but as is our tradition, we give us each presenter at the EPN a certificate of appreciation, and Joe's handing those out right now. Thank you all for your participation, and have a wonderful week. Thank you.